Yo, what's good, boys? We are back at it again with another MLB The Show 25 video for you guys. And today we're going to start updating our tier list. And we're going to start with our pitchers. Then we'll do like our infielders or outfielders after this. Hopefully concluding with like a top 50 list right before Weekend Classic comes out. So that's kind of the roadmap. Hopefully you guys enjoy the content. Additionally, roll call. If you want to be in the next reviewing your team's video, I think that's going to be tomorrow, if not the day after. So get those final submissions in if you want to be in those videos. And let's go ahead and hop into it. And as per always, if you enjoy the content, like, subscribe. I think I'm up to a 40% watch time from subscribers. So that's pretty good in the grand scheme of YouTube. So I appreciate you guys. And let's go ahead and hop into it here. So Bobby Suarez, probably like B tier. Anyone that's been running him for like the whole year is ecstatic right now because he's got really good clutch, really good hits, double outlier. I just kind of question the control at times, and his pitch mix isn't the craziest thing in the world. But if you just want a double outlier guy and don't want to go out and get like Ben Joyce or Ursag, Robert Suarez is right here for like 600 stubs. Can't really go wrong with him. I think we're going to try to use the entire tier list this time. So if I put like somebody in F tier, it doesn't mean they're trash. Just means I think they're niche or like not super relevant. Like Yimi Garcia here. I'm leaning probably D tier for him. Like he's fine. If he's in your bullpen, I think he is probably one of your weaker bullpen pitchers. But he's not necessarily a bad card. Matt Strahm definitely is down a little bit. Maybe he's still an A tier card. If he has a good inside edge, I think he's firmly A tier. But you can't always rely on that. And his hits are pretty low now. Assuming you've used him enough and got some parallels on him, his clutch is still pretty good. But the hits are like 79, I want to say, before parallels. Might even be worse than that. And I feel like a lot of people are stacking their lineups with like Carlos Santana and stuff, just people that tear the cover off the ball against lefties because of Randy and John and stuff. So I think his effectiveness has gone down a bit. I wouldn't call him like the best lefty reliever in the game anymore, because that's going to Danny. So I think the gold Danny is A tier. I don't usually make a distinction from like multiple cards, but I think for this card it's worth doing because like the diamond one's like 60k, this one's like what, 900 subs, 1200 subs, something like that. So I think he's really good value, and he's probably the best value reliever in the game. Justin Martinez, D tier. I think he just doesn't give you a lot. Like there's some value in the splitter mixed with a fast normal four seam with the sinker and that kind of hard slider on really high difficulties. But I think on All-Star he sucks. I think Hall of Fame he sucks. I think Legend, he's not the greatest. He's almost like a GOAT pitcher. Like the ball has to be a blur for him to be good. And if the ball's a blur, every pitcher is going to be, at least effective on some level. All right, so Andrew Miller, I don't think he's like... Objectively, I think he's kind of F tier, to be honest. Like, I think he's way more useful for his boost. I would rather have Matt Strahm in most scenarios, unless it's like maybe like 125 clutch contact guy. Then maybe you do need to shrink their PCI a little more. But I think just objectively, Miller's pitch mix just not super good. You're throwing a normal four seam, which you're almost never going to throw with him, and then the sinker and the slider. So he's almost like a two-pitch reliever. So I don't rate him that highly. I think he should like never see a righty as well, which I think is most lefties. But Kobe Milner, C tier. I feel like C tier was just kind of made for him. Some games he's gonna be S tier, some games he's gonna be F tier. And he has bad clutch as well. The hits are okay, especially if you put parallels on him and you spam him. But I feel like he's a coin flip every time you bring him in. It's either gonna be great or it's gonna be terrible. And he can never just have like a solid outing. Gregory Soto, A tier with like an exception. His pinpoint's janky. It's a little all over the place. And he doesn't have a changeup anymore. So I think that holds him back a little bit if he still had a changeup, because I think he has a slider and a sweeper or a slurve, whichever one it is. And if he just had a changeup instead of one of those pitches, I think he'd probably be S tier. But he is still pretty solid, assuming you can get around the pinpoint. Raleigh, A tier. You know, the most consistent bullpen reliever in the game still, I think. His dime is kind of coming due. I think his hits are, you know, a little below probably what you want at this point. But really it's his clutch carrying him. I think he's got 118, and it's just like the clutch and the speed differentials are why you're still using Raleigh. Sean Jelly, cool. You know, 6'11", janky, and throws legit one of the harder sinkers I've seen all year. To not have outlier on it is crazy how hard he throws it. And he's just a control freak. So he is the definition of super niche. If you're pitching him to an opponent that has not had to hit him all year, they're probably going to struggle against him. Billy Wagner, F tier. I think his pitch mix is a little bit better than like Miller's, but no outlier, and his per nines just aren't that good. So I'm not a big fan of this card either. I see a lot of like these two in people's bullpen, or actually these three, yeah, because Mark Davis is up next. I think Mark Davis is D tier. I'm never gonna say he's good, but you know, there's just not that many great lefty relievers in the game right now. So if he's sneaking in your bullpen, then it's fine. All right, so we got so many pitchers to get through. John Franco, A tier. I think I view him as similar to like Gold Danny, where most of the time he's solid. It's fine. He's a lefty I'm more comfortable to pitching with righties with, because he just has 5 pitches. And he's got the screwball, which is kind of universally a swing and a miss, at least the first couple times you throw it on higher difficulties. So he's always got that going for him, but he's also never really super dominant, and he's not like the craziest control pitcher, even though he doesn't throw that hard. But he's always like a solid card. Kopech, probably also A tier. The big problem with him is the control. Some of his bars are ridiculous. So that would probably be my biggest complaint. But I think if you want that outlier fastball, slower rollover cutter combo, this is your guy. It's not Rob Dibble. I think I'd rather use Kopech than Dibble. So as far as that archetype, I don't really rate that archetype super high. But if you're going to run one of them in your bullpen, I think Michael Kopech's probably the one to go with there. Goose. He is basically the right-handed equivalent of Gregory Soto. Definitely a different mix because you're working like the normal changeup with the outlier fastball. But he also kind of has janky, messed up pinpoint, where his is good until you get runners on base, and then it kind of takes a nosedive at that point. So you got to pay attention with Goose. You got to be really proficient with your pinpoint, or just be on like a different pitching medium. But he can be really good, even though I think his per nines are a little behind, and he is definitely not a control freak. But you can make him work. Bruce Sutter, D tier. I think you can, again, another card, you can make him work. You're just working that slower splitter with a four seam and a slider. So he's not great by any means, but if you just need like a splitter pitcher in the bullpen, he's here. I think I might be talking myself into F tier with him. I'm sure there's going to be people that have used this card and enjoy him, but I just don't rate him that high. David Robertson, I think B tier. If similar to like Kopech, where if you want this like cutter only archetype of pitcher, I think Robertson blows Kenley out of the water. I think there's kind of a limit on how good that archetype can be. But if you just want to have somebody in your bullpen that can do it, I think David Robertson's that guy. I think he's kind of always underrated in MLB The Show. He's always carrying out a funky release, and I think the live series has a 5-pitch mix, so maybe look out for like a decent David Robertson at some point this year. But right now, this one's kind of niche. where if you just want that archetype of reliever, he's probably the best of that batch, but not necessarily great. Dibble, just worst Kopech in my eyes, so I think he's just a tier under him. Matt Brash, B tier. All these B tier guys are not bad. Like, they're very serviceable relievers. I think that's what Matt Brash is. Doesn't have outlier, but he throws like 100, 101 consistently. He is super nice with that and has a 5-pitch mix, so he's not bad by any means. I think that's more or less how I feel about Trevor Hoffman too, where this has been one of the bigger disconnects for me this year, where it's like a lot of people really enjoy this Hoffman, and he's like their go-to righty out of the bullpen. I have never been good with the Trevor Hoffman card, ever. I think it's just, honestly, it's a competition thing. I think good players just hit Hoffman well. I don't think he throws anything crazy that's going to get you swings and misses against good players other than the cutter. You're pretty much just using him at that point because of the cutter. And I feel like there's other guys that have a cutter, but he's not bad, and he works, and he's a good like ground ball pitcher with like the slider circle change combo. So you can use him, but he's not my favorite for sure. Chapman, probably B tier. He's really close to A tier, and if he either had like outlier four seam instead of the sinker, or if he had like just halfway decent control, he'd probably be A tier. But you're dealing with pars that are actually half the strike zone, and that's on Hall of Fame. On Legend, it's like 3/4 of the strike zone. You have no idea where the ball is going to go. And then his pitch mix just isn't traditionally as good as what like a Chapman would have for us. So he's still solid, and he's still an okay option. And a lot of people just have like this mental block when it comes to hitting off Chapman, just thinking he's like super sauced every single year. This one is probably one of the worst Chapmans we've gotten since like the Cubs one last year. But some people just still struggle to hit him. So I think he's got some value just for that reason. Mason Miller, I think A tier. He had more value like before this last roster update, because last roster update they gave him like +10 control, and then this roster update they took it away. So last roster update he was actually better. He still shrinks PCIs with like away sliders on like Hall of Fame and Legend, so he's got that going for him. It's just not as prevalent on GOAT as it used to be. And he almost always has a good inside edge since he is a reliever. So pretty solid card, all things considered. If you just need like an outlier four-seam guy out of the bullpen, it's pretty much like him, Goose, Kopech. There's not a ton of them, so it's always nice to have one or two of them kicking around in the bullpen to show people that look, because there's not a ton of outlier guys. Same kind of for Urseg. I think he's all right, like outlier four seam, outlier sinker. Just doesn't really top out super consistently. When I used him, every time I threw his fastball, it was like 100 or 101, which is still fast, but it's different from the guys like Randy and John, and like Mason Miller, who are like routinely hitting 103, sometimes even 104. So just not my favorite pitcher in the world. I think he's got pretty much like the default pitch mix. And I think I'd rather use Ben Joyce than pay like $10K for Lucas Urseg, because I view them as pretty similar cards. So I think I'm going to put Joyce in A tier just because he's better value, I think. But they are pretty similar. I would also think Ben Joyce tops out more consistently. So that's another difference between those two. Luke Weaver, cool card. Nothing wrong with him. The curveball kind of holds him back a little bit. You'd prefer him to probably have a more useful fifth pitch. But a 5-pitch reliever, those don't grow on trees, especially not ones that are touching 100 with their fastball and then have like a slower, more rollover-ish cutter. So he's really solid and translates well to those higher ranks. So Low Izaga, I think he's just a better version of Urseg. If you want another outlier sinker guy, here you go. Ottavino, I think kind of B tier. I've never really struggled too much against him. He's always a pitcher that struggles with control. I believe this one also only has 4 pitches. So he's fine. If he's in your bullpen, he's cool. I don't think he's going to be like one of your better options. Hader, D tier, I view him similar as Mark Davis, where for some people he's going to be BP, and for some people the two seam will just kind of mess him up because you don't see a ton of two seams online. And it's not even necessarily that it moves, it's just the different spin on the ball will throw some people off. But Hader's in a weird spot where like he either needs like a fourth pitch or outlier on the two seam. I don't even know what that would look like. I don't know if they've ever done an outlier two seam. But he needs something to differentiate him because right now he's just kind of stuck being a BP lefty for the most part. If Miller had his pitch mix, I think Miller would be better because of the funkier release. But this Josh Hader card is just kind of mid. Danny, first S tier reliever. So the main difference between this and the gold one is like some pitching clutch, little bit of hits, a little bit of control, and then his pitch control on this card is a lot higher. So depending on how much value you have on that and how many stubs you got kicking around in the bank account, that can kind of inform your decision if you want the gold or the diamond. The diamond is slightly better, especially if you start putting parallels on him. He'll definitely be better. Bryan Abreu. I think I want to put him F just because like this card's almost pointless. He's like an Edwin Diaz if he didn't have outlier. If you think that sounds like a bad card, it's probably because it is. So not awesome by any means. I think I'd definitely rather have all of these guys in my bullpen than him. He's like his one, I guess, niche is proper because his one niche is probably if you are on legend difficulty and you want to spam away sliders to shrink somebody's PCI. The issue with that is most people are just running full switch hitter lineups at this point anyway. And then on GOAT, they kind of adjusted how much the PCI shrinks. And on Hall of Fame, usually it's not going to matter that much. So he's kind of in a weird spot right now. So I think niche or F tier are both pretty applicable to him. Let's see. Blake Trinan. Either like B or C. I think even if he had outlier sinker, right, that would put him more in like direct competition with like Robert Suarez, Ottavino, kind of what Loizaga does, but Loizaga also throws 5 pitches. So for me, Trinan's just not that crazy, honestly. He's a guy that needs his outlier, and he doesn't have his outlier. So this card is just kind of bleh, like he's C tier, like he's fine if he's in your bullpen. It's fine. Not a good card, not a bad card. Andres Munoz. This is probably the hardest one to rank because when I've used him online, he's been like pretty decent for me. But I do question the speed differentials with him because he's throwing like a 90-mile-an-hour slider, 90-mile-an-hour circle change, 102-mile-an-hour fastball, and like a 97, 99 sinker. So he's throwing hard, and the double outlier is working for sure with this card. But I do question the speed differentials, also question kind of the control of the card because a lot of his pitches, the pars are like half the strike zone. And that's just kind of how he is. So I think he's more of like a coin flip pitcher, but I think he's a pretty good coin flip, if that makes sense. Jeff Hoffman, either B tier or like very low A tier. Splitter pitcher, so if you want somebody with a splitter. Yeah, we actually don't have a splitter guy in A tier. So I think as far as like a splitter bullpen pitcher, I'm pretty sure he's like 4-seam, sinker, splitter, slider, I want to say. So if you need a splitter guy in your bullpen, which who doesn't need a splitter guy in their bullpen, Jeff Hoffman can do that for you. All right, so Darren O'Day. When the game first came out, probably S tier. I view him more as like A tier now, where he's cool. I think he's kind of similar to Bryan Abreu, where like at his best is probably going to be on legend facing a righty, being able to spam away sliders. I think there being like as many switch hitters as there are now, and just GOAT being nerfed in general as a difficulty really kind of hurt him because I feel like that's kind of where he was at his ceiling. But he's still a cool card. He's still kind of funky. If you're playing somebody who hasn't seen him a lot this year, they're probably going to struggle against him. He's just like better Hobie Milner, in my opinion, which just, I think lands him in A tier. Eckersley, this is a hard one to rank because I haven't used him. But in my mind, he's just like a better Sean Jelly, I would think. So I think probably A tier. I mean, his niche is like being able to put a sinker anywhere in the bottom of the zone he wants. He can probably dot the slider anywhere he wants. That's traditionally how like Eckersley cards are, is where he's just one of the best control freak pitchers in the game. And when how the game plays this year, with like how many lineouts you hit and how hard it is to get good results on pitches, I think there is a world where Eckersley just comes in the game and throws you 3 straight down and away sliders in a row, and you either get struck out or you line out to first base, right field, something like that. Is kind of how I see this card. So he could be really good, maybe even like S tier, but we'll have to see when he becomes more widely available, because I'm personally not paying 100K for what he does. Gagne, probably one of my worst age takes. I gave him the benefit of the doubt with the new pitch mix on the top 50 players video, and I think I kind of jumped the gun on that one. I think he's B tier, maybe A tier. The problem with him is like the splitter and the palm ball that he throws are pretty much the same pitch. They have a little bit different of a spin, which might mess some people up. But really, he boils down to what he always has been, which is like slider. Now he throws a slurve instead of a curveball, but it's kind of the same thing where it's really slow. So it's like slider, 4-seam, 1 changeup, and then a chase pitch that most people aren't ever going to chase. So it's kind of the same Gagne, same Gagne, different year. I think if you want to argue for him to be A tier, you can. But I think I kind of view him more in this tier. He's just one of these guys, but with better hits. So if that puts him in A tier for you, cool. But I never feel good about bringing in Gagne out of the bullpen. And now we are on to our starters. So we are 20 minutes deep just in relievers. So might try to power through some starters real quick. Leiter, A tier, enough said. The control's kind of suspect at this point. Just the per 9s in general are kind of getting behind at this point. But he's still a really solid card. Ubaldo, probably B tier. I like him because he has a splitter. There's not too many pitchers that throw a splitter. So you can throw that hard sinker, you can throw that splitter. I think he still has at least some role on some teams. And I like that you can kind of go back and get him now, since the cornerstone packs give like flashbacks now. Arrieta, I think he's kind of the definition of like C tier, where it's fine. You're throwing that hard slider with the hard sinker. But he just is never going to do great in a meta where most of the lineups are switch hitters, most of the lineups are lefties. So that's kind of his issue. Edward Cabrera, D tier. Not to say he's like bad, but if you're on a budget, I think it's a really good budget option for you. But I don't think he's actually that great. Maybe he's more in line with Arrieta, but I just kind of question how big Cabrera's pars are going to be at time. I used it on one of the alt accounts, but I don't know like what the max difficulty I ended up pitching him on, or if he's stuck in the rotation. Schultz, similar to Arrieta, really good when the game first came out. Now he's kind of dated. Maybe you want to put him B tier, but I just think I like what Ubaldo does more with a splitter and a hard sinker, more so than like what Noah Schultz does. Noah Schultz is just glitchy deliveries and like being really effective against lefties, whereas Ubaldo at least has more like swing and miss stuff, I think, with the splitter. Logan Gilbert, another splitter guy. Live series, maybe if you catch him on the right day, he would be better than Ubaldo. Just kind of depends on the inside edge. He's also a primary slider guy, so if you're going to spam the slider a lot, which usually isn't a good idea, then he's got a little more viability with that. So I think he's solid. Paul Skeens, controversial here. C tier as well, I think. There's just like no avenue for Paul Skeens having a dominant outing, I feel like. other than either getting on such a bad server to where you're just cooked, or your opponent just not being able to hit outlier. Like every time I've seen Paul Skeens, I've hit really good off of them. And it just boils down to outlier four seam, sinker, and then everything else is just pretty much trash. Like you're just throwing a bunch of chase pitches and hoping your opponent wants to offer at them. But most good players are not going to. So he kind of sucks. Andy P. Nothing wrong with him. I think he's B tier. I would say he's like an above average lefty starter. If you're on maybe Hall of Fame, but probably you would want to be on like Legend or even GOAT to use this card. But I don't think he's bad. He just reminds me of kind of Cliff Lee, where he doesn't have a ton of great out pitches, and you're just kind of hoping to pitch for contact. And against like righty switch hitters, you're just going to be throwing them a ton of inside cutters the whole game, which is not always the most fun thing to be doing. Buehler, C tier, I think he's in this range where, not great. Card does throw really hard for a Walker Buehler card, and I feel like his release is kind of janky this year, to where he can be kind of tough to hit. But, I mean, double curveball, just not really ever going to do him any favors. I think a lot of people in like this tier kind of just have either issues with their pitch mix. Like Skeens and Buehler are both pretty good with like their initial pitches, but then it's like the secondary, the tertiary pitches just aren't really up to snuff. Corbin Burns, probably B tier, where if you can really tunnel well with him and you're never going to miss your pinpoint, he's still pretty solid, but he's not great, not dominant by any means. And you kind of have to be playing good players for him to be good. I feel like most bad players are going to hit pretty well off Corbin Burns. Don. I think niche for Don. I think the ideal circumstance for Don is like Legend, GOAT, and you're just hoping your opponent has never seen him before, and you're almost using him as like a right-handed Fernando. But even then, he throws like a slow screwball, which I think is definitely worse than throwing like, an 82, 83 mile an hour screwball the way Fernando does. So just, I think he's kind of niche. He's probably not F tier objectively. He's probably like D or C, but I think he's niche, so I'm going to put him there. Satchel, D tier. I've never seen Satchel have a great outing. Every time I've ever pitched him, he does bad. Every time I've seen him, I do good against him. And it just kind of boils down to he's the definition of like a skill issue pitcher, I feel like, where if you're not offering, if you can time up the screwballs in the zone and not swinging the ones out of the zone, and you're not chasing the curveball that a lot of people like to throw with him a ton, and you don't really struggle against outlier. So pretty much if you're a good player, you're going to tattoo Satchel. If you're a bad player, you're going to think he's Zeus. So I kind of get the perception of him, but I think for most people, he's not good. Let's see. Wheeler. Hardly know her again. D tier. He's cool. Double curveball really hurts this card. Again, like I've been saying kind of all year, I wish he had a splitter from like the finest one at the end of last year. If they give him that mix, I think he'd still be kind of in the running. A lot of these live series pitchers have bad clutch. So he's all right. He's fine. Mr. Lord here. I think A tier. I think I've been sleeping on this card. I did not know until I coached a guy that pitched him. They throws like an 82 mile an hour forkball. Don't ask me why. I just never really. I still don't think he ever fits in like the best 5 starters in the game by any means. I didn't think he'd fit in that like week 1, really. And I still don't think he does. But he almost has like a Fergie Jenkins type role from, if any of you guys used that charisma card like 2-3 years ago at this point. It reminds me of that, where sometimes you just need like a slow forkball type pitch to get strikeouts. And he can do that for you. So I like him for that reason. But that's about it. Logan Webb, B tier. He's almost like the right-handed version of this Andy P, where you're pitching for contact, you're trying to dot. I think like Hall of Fame against bad players is probably going to be his best spot, because that's when he's going to have some of his smaller pars, as well as, you know, not be overly reliant on, obviously every pitcher kind of gets better on Legend, better on GOAT. But I think like Hall of Fame against bad players or Legend is probably where you want to be with like Logan Webb or Pettit. I think past that on GOAT, you kind of want guys with outlier that can just like abuse that difficulty. Not really sure why I'm talking about GOAT that much. Like that many people that are going to watch this video will ever play on it. But just know it sucks. Hunter Green, I think B tier. You can get some good starts out of Hunter Green. Hunter Green is what Paul Skeens wants to be. Obviously, Paul Skeens has the sinker, so that's kind of one thing that he has over Hunter Green. But I think you can put in work with just the splitter and that outlier four seam with Hunter Green, to where it won't really matter too much that he only has 4 pitches. I would rather use him than Paul Skeens. All right, who we got next? Kluber, pretty much just Logan Webb for the most part. I don't know if Logan Webb throws a slurve off the top of my head the way Kluber does, but both of them just kind of have mediocre like hits, kind of live off the four-seam cutter sinker combo, and just your opponent not being able to square those pitches up. Similar to Webb, he's probably going to be best on like Hall of Fame where he can dot more, or Legend against players that aren't super comfortable on that difficulty. Is probably going to be where he's best. Cueto, another guy. It's just kind of, you know, Spider-Man meme. Where another guy pretty similar. I think he probably has the funkiest delivery out of these guys. But I also think he runs into a lot of the same issues as these other guys do. Where, again, you're just trying to dot with him and hoping that your opponent isn't good enough to hit the dots. So that's just kind of what he boils down to. Dustin May, S tier, first S tier starter. I think he's basically impossible to hit. I don't know how anybody can hit consistently off this card, other than his speed differentials just aren't great. That's the one issue. If his circle change could be like 2-3 miles an hour slower, we'd be talking about like a perfect right-handed pitcher, I would think. But there's a lot to love about Dustin May. Jim Palmer. C tier, there's not a ton to love about him. Just kind of like a Bob Gibson type pitcher where you're working the four seam with the normal changeup, kind of a BP like curveball slider situation where it's like this card, cool name to have, great pitcher in real life, not ever probably going to be good in the show. So Matthew, I think he's one of the more slept on cards in the game. I think he's pretty solid. There's nothing bad I can say about the card. He's just like a kind of like a control freak lefty, but you just kind of feel more comfortable with him over a guy like Andy Pettit at this point. So I think he's like an A tier good lefty. Like if he's your like 4th, 5th starter in your rotation, you've probably got a pretty good rotation. Hunter Brown, I think this card kind of sucks. Not a big fan of him. He just doesn't really have pitches that like work together well. And he doesn't have outlier, and he's also not like topping out. Like he's not throwing 101, 102. He's throwing like 99, 98. Just stuff that isn't that hard to catch up to. Jacob deGrom, I think he fits in this A tier where he might be the card that the most people come to me and ask if he's worth it or not. The answer is no. I mean, if you've just like ran through the Easter program and you've locked in a lot of the cards already, then like sure, if he's there, he's there. You don't have to lock in like Polanco or anything, so I'm sure he's not super expensive to do at this point. But he's also not super good. Like he's mid. He has bad speed differentials, so he's going to struggle to get strikeouts. Unless your opponent just cannot hit outlier, he's going to struggle to get strikeouts. It is a little bit of a different DeGrom card because he throws a slurve, but he also doesn't have the sinker that they've liked to give to his more meta cards the last few years. So I don't know if we'll ever see a DeGrom that's like at the level of that All-Star one from years ago, just because of how the game has kind of shifted fundamentally. Johan Santana, this card sucks. I think it's probably D, where like I could see you getting a good start out of him, similar to like Zach Wheeler, but just fundamentally there's something wrong with this pitch mix. Where I've seen people really love this card, but I just cannot imagine how he's good. He will get a good card at some point, but I don't think this is it. I've hit off him a couple times. I think I've seen him like once or twice right when the game came out and people were trying to use him and like forcing themselves to use him almost. And ever since then, haven't seen him. I think there's a good reason for that, and it's because he's not that good. Bob Gibson. So Palmer C tier, Gibson B tier. That's just kind of how I'm going to do that. I think, yeah, you can start him and feel just as good about him as like Corbin Burns or Ubaldo or one of these guys, where it's just, you know, more times than not, they'll give you a decent start, but they also might get shelled. That's kind of how I view this Bob. If he had an outlier, if he had slightly better control, we'd be talking about a really good card, similar to some of the Bobs that we have seen in recent history, like at the start of, I think, MLB 23, he was like one of the bosses or one of the set collections or something, and then he had a pretty good card last year as well. So he is historically pretty good and one of our like better righties, but this card just ain't it because he doesn't have outlier. John Don, S tier, obviously. Honestly, his per nines are like kind of already behind, where like his sinker par is half the strike zone a lot of the time. Same kind of goes for like the slurve and even the slider if you're trying to throw it high a decent amount. And I don't think his hits are really in a great spot either. But all that being said, he still has the best pure pitch mix in the game with double outlier slider, like the only guy in the game with outlier slider. And he is just gross year after year. So nothing different here. Even if his hits are a little behind. It's kind of like last year where with like that chase card one, a lot of people say he was unusable because the hits were bad. He's never going to be unusable. I'm going to put Diego in D tier. When this card came out, he was probably bad enough to deserve F tier just based on like the power scaling and how far behind he was. But there's nothing special about this card. He needed like outlier or just to have a better pitch mix or like crazy hits. And they gave him nothing because they wanted him to be like a hitter or a pitcher. And they didn't really fully commit to one side or the other. So he just kind of ended up being mid, unfortunately. All right, who we got? Michael Wacha. I think I view him similar to like Corbin Burns, where you can probably get some pretty good starts out of him on like a higher difficulty. Maybe Walker Buehler's like a more similar comp to him. I think I really gotta like just go look at his pitches because I really haven't done like an in-depth breakdown of that card. Let's see. So 87 hits, 97 pitching clutch. Pitching clutch is good. Hits are probably a little low. Control's really good. 94, circle change, cutter, sinker, slider. You can make that work. I don't think it's the craziest pitch mix in the world, but I think it does land him in B tier and not in C tier. Matt Cain, my initial reaction for this card was going to be B tier, but I think he's just C tier. He's just, like, I viewed him as kind of a worse version of Jordan Zimmerman, but he's really not that because Zimmerman's way more of like a control pitcher than what this Matt Cain is. His control is not necessarily the greatest, but neither is like his pitch mix or his hits. So I think he's just very mid, similar to a lot of these other like C tier pitchers. Shohei, I think he's free C tier. Objectively, like his pitch mix really isn't that bad. You could definitely do some work with his pitch mix. I still think the best version of Ohtani as a pitcher is like the WBC one with outlier four seam. and we haven't seen that in a while. But this one's cool. Like you can work with like a cutter and a sinker combo. You can definitely go to work. The problem with him is always the control. Like I think he has actually what, like 52, 48 walks, something like that, and then not the craziest pitch controls on top of that. So you're just talking about pars are like half the strike zone, and Lord forbid you want to throw like a high sinker in the zone. It's not happening. So I think last year he kind of had an argument with the inside edge and just having some absurdly high hits. And maybe when he gets back to pitching in real life, maybe they will bump like his controlled or something. But as of right now, he is pretty shambolic to pitch with. You're just asking for pure RNG anytime you start him. Bailey Ober, I kind of view as like similar to Michael Wacha. This is another card that's kind of gone under the radar for me. You can see 91 hits, 104 clutch. But he throws 2 curveballs and a slider and a circle change. So he's pretty trash. I can't lie. I thought he was when I looked this card up. So good hits and really good pitching clutch. But anytime you're throwing a double curveball, kind of similar to like Zach Wheeler, it's never going to be great. The thing is, Zach Wheeler has, a sinker and a cutter to work off of it. Whereas Bailey Ober just has a regular 4-seam. So he's going to get tattooed. Luis Hill, D tier. He's a 4-pitch pitcher with 4 pretty like routine pitches. I'm pretty sure it's 4-seam, sinker, slider, and a circle change. So you can work with that. Like there's 5-pitch pitchers that just have that mix with a curveball, and people view them different because they have 5 pitches. So it's not the worst thing in the world. And you know what? I could probably be talked into like maybe C tier with him. But he's nothing crazy, especially without outlier. Speaking of outlier, Randy. So another S tier guy here, where the control is pretty bad with this Randy at times, like especially on Legend and GOAT. You're talking about pars are like half the strike zone, but it's still Randy Johnson at the end of the day. And he actually throws his splitter slower than he has. Like in the past, he's throwing at like 90, 92. This one throws a splitter like 88, 86 sometimes even. So it kind of leads to more swings and misses than traditional Randys do. So I feel like in the past with Randy, every time you give up a home run, it's like off the splitter or off the slurve for the most part. And you don't see that as much with this one splitter. So I think there's some positives to be had with this Randy as well. Zim, probably just very top of A tier, where he's kind of one of those guys that is fighting for like that 4th, 5th spot with some of these other guys that are like very top of A tier, where if you like them, they're probably S tier for you and in your default 5, and if you don't like them, they're probably like A, B tier for you. So Merrill Kelly, cool card, like B tier. Kind of similar to like Kluber and Logan Webb, where he doesn't throw hard. He just kind of has controlled pitches. And it's like cutter sinker, just hoping that your opponent doesn't square them up. But he's never necessarily going to be like a dominant pitcher. New Cliff Lee, pretty disappointing card because I feel like he could have came out and been pretty good. And I think he's just niche. I think this is a card that you bring out on GOAT. And even on GOAT, I would be worried about it because just really low hits. Maybe on like the Phillies boost, maybe he'd be really good. But as his current state is, I feel like you're only really using him on GOAT. All right, so we got some Color Storm guys coming up. Jerry Jones. I want to put him A tier, but I feel like he's almost like a better Bob Gibson. He just doesn't throw a normal changeup the way Bob does. So I think that holds him back. But not a bad card by any means. Like if you just need a starter that's got, top out at 99, 100 semi-frequently and has a 5-pitch mix, then he's here for you. And I think that's a good spot to be. It's a fine pitcher. It's just not one that's like towards the top of my radar. Kind of the same for Jack Leiter, where he throws a little bit slower. Maybe he has a slightly better pitch mix, depending on what you like, but not the craziest card in the world there. Lodolo, C tier. He's just like all gimmick. Like his pitches aren't that good. His pitch mix isn't necessarily that good. He's just working off having like a funky low lefty arm slot and being really hard to hit lefty. So that's kind of where he lives at. Brian Wu, he's got a pretty trash pitch mix, I'll be honest. If he had a better one, I think he'd be hooping. But I'm pretty sure it's like four seam, slow cutter, like a sweeper and a slurve or something like that. It's not ideal. So it's less than ideal. I think I'd rather just use like his teammate or a guy with outlier or a guy that also has some pitching flaws but has like a funkier release and an even slower cutter. I think the only guys in this tier I would rather use, like maybe Brian Wu, would maybe be Hunter Brown. Maybe I'm giving this Hunter Brown too much of a pass. Maybe I'm giving Matt Cain too much of a pass, but I think all of these are probably better pitchers. Pedro, top of A tier, where he's like one of the guys that are competing with like Zimmerman and Leiter and Liberatore for like, maybe this is your fifth starter. Maybe this is your fourth, fifth starter, assuming you have like the best rotation in the game. Obviously, there's a world where maybe you have like John and then four of these guys. And it's still a pretty good rotation. But for me, S tier is like the best rotation. And then we have Clemens, which is an automatic inclusion here. I think if I had to like organize these starters, that's how I would have it. Would be Rogers probably the best. John's probably second best. Dustin May and Randy are kind of tied for that like 3-4 spot. And then you're really just looking for that fifth. And it could be DeGrom, it could be Leiter, it could be Liberatore, it could be Zimmerman, it could be Pedro. It just kind of depends on, you know, how you feel about those cards. And if you're on certain difficulties, maybe it's Fernando, who somehow ended up not on the list here. So Nando's C tier, because on All-Star, he's going to be trash. On Hall of Fame, most of the time he's going to be trash. On Legend, he'll be pretty good. And on GOAT, he is potentially the best GOAT pitcher. So I think he's really solid, but it's kind of hard for the general population to use him. He doesn't like transcend difficulty the way that like these guys do. So hopefully you guys enjoyed. This was a super long tier list, so we're going to have to get started on these timestamps ASAP to get this out for you guys. So hopefully you enjoyed. If you did, like, subscribe. Let me know if I missed anybody. Till next time. Peace.